Howdy folks, Justin here, and welcome to my Houses of Morrowind review for Green Agility. We're going to start off with Dres Spy. I think I've said almost every time so far when I've looked at the new zero cost cards, oh, you always got to look at them to see if they synergize with Smuggler's Hall, and then I always say no, they don't. Well, in this case, it does. Dres Spy is great in Smuggler's Hall decks who need to filter through their deck to find their combo pieces. Dres Spy is not an unreasonable include in other kinds of decks, too. I can see this being in a super aggressive green based archer deck, super aggressive green based assassin deck. I like Dress By a lot. It's a very solid card. Pushes the curve for what zero cost cards can do, and I think it's definitely going to see play. Glass Greaves, or Grass Gleaves, is a new green item for one that gives a creature +1/+1 and has plot, reduce the cost of a random card in your hand by one. I've always loved the surplus or whatever lane in Chaos Arena and in Solo Arena that has the ability that this plot triggers. I've always thought it's a lot of fun. I like going into that lane just hard and just dropping all my stuff real quickly because I like to play expensive cards in this game. Is this card any good? Well, it serves as both a plot enabler and a plot, a card that benefits from having other plot enablers in your hand. Dres Spy, by the way, one of the most powerful zero cost cards in the game, could enable plot in a very aggressively oriented deck. Is Glass Greaves any good? Well, it may be a necessary part of a dedicated plot deck that is two colors. Three colors, I feel like you're going to have to slow your deck down a little bit unless you just plan on getting super lucky, which will happen. But the bottom line is Glass Greaves is a powerful card. I don't know that it's good enough to see any regular play. Moonsugar Smuggler is a cool looking new Khajiit, 1/1 for 1 with Last Gasp, gain 2 magic at this turn. This card is not good, but I will play it. That is my opinion on this. The benefit from losing that the card disadvantage is going to give you is not often going to be enough to offset the card disadvantage, especially since the kinds of things you're going to want to ramp into suggest to me that you're a slower, more reactive, or at least more controlling deck, and those kinds of decks live and die based on their card advantage, not their tempo. There's also the problem that if this dies on your opponent's turn, it doesn't, you get no benefit from it, and frequently it's going to die in combat on your opponent's turn, and you're just going to be SOL. So that said, I like this card a lot personally, but I don't think it's very good. Morag Tongue Aspirin is a 2/1 for 1 non-unique legendary creature, joining the ranks of what is it? The Relentless Raider, in terms of cards that you kind of wish you could put in a bunch of decks, but have a really tough time justifying the crafting cost of. So it says Slay, summon a copy of Morag Tongue Aspirant. Some matchups this is going to be crazy good. In some matchups this is going to be awful. Even if you go out of your way to buff up its toughness, or run things like Divine Fervor with it, or run it in a deck that can rally it up, a Halalu rally deck might be a thing, and if it is, it'll include this card. I'm just not super impressed with this card. It is one of the most powerful one-drops in the game, but there are not... Running one-drops in this game is challenging to justify because the ring allows half your games to start with 2 Magicka, basically, and in that case, almost every 2-drop is going to be a better play than a Morag Tongue Aspirant. I like this card. I appreciate all the work that went into this set's 1-drops, trying to put things into the game that we might be interested in running, and to some extent they succeed, and to some extent they succeed with this card, because I can imagine playing this card and being satisfied with the experience. That said, it's not a card I'm going to rush out to craft right away, although it is a card I expect to see quite a bit of. Awakened Dreamer is a 2 Magicka 2/3 that says at the end of your turn, if you have a creature with 5 or more power, Awakened Dreamer gets +1/+1. That's cool. This is not a particularly good card. The kind of deck that's going to be able to trigger this consistently is not the kind of card that wants to play a 2-drop that has 2/3 in stats and doesn't do anything interesting. Deranged Corpus is one of the cheapest House Dagoth, Matters cards, the 5 power Matters cards in the game. It's a 0/1 for 2 that says on your turn it gets +5/+0. If you really want to trigger your House Dagoth abilities, this is one of the cheapest ways to do it. Is this card reasonable enough on its own to be just in a super aggressive green deck? Yeah, it probably is. Obviously, it dies to a whole bunch of stuff, almost everything in the game. But you get one hit with it in, and two magic for 5 damage is a pretty good rate. People play uh, Mournhold Trader for 4 damage. Although it's more difficult to remove, it has a higher downside. Um, and Deranged Corpus is kind of like that card. You're all in with Deranged Corpus. If you're looking to enable your House Dagoth strategies on turn 3 and 4, maybe you're doing House Dagoth wrong. But you would probably run this card in that deck, and that deck is probably pretty strong. Uh, you know, this card's going to see play. Probably more often than not in House Dagoth decks, but could see play in your House Dagoth decks as well. It's a common, so craft some up and enjoy it. Morag Tongue Assassin's 2 magic 3/2, totally fine rate right there, and has summon a 0/1 target with guard for your opponent, slay +1/+1. If this just had the slay +1/+1 thing, I'd think this card was never seen play. The ability to summon a target for your opponent, I like this card quite a bit. I think that the Brotherhood Stronghold, or I'm sorry, the the support card that causes your slay abilities to trigger twice is a card that needs to get another look taken at it. Now that we've had all these new slay creatures introduced in the game, it's always been kind of a gimmicky deck, and it's probably still going to be kind of a gimmicky deck, or or card, I guess, in particular, since most of the cards on their own are pretty playable. But I like this card quite a bit. I think there are probably better 2 drops, especially in green, that you could be playing in a deck that would benefit from this. But in a deck that wants to go all in on the assassination slay strategy and has other benefits for targets in case this guy gets removed right away, I like this. This card's going to see play. It's not bad. Silt Strider is one of my favorite arts in the entire expansion. It's a 0/4 for 2 with Prophecy and Guard and has summon move friendly creature to this lane. This card is very, very, very strong and not particularly useful. Uh, I can imagine a whole bunch of decks actually where I'd love to play this card. Uh, the thing is that you need to keep in mind when playing this is that like you need to make use of a 0/4 body, besides just the lane change effect and the random prophecy percentage chance that you increase your deck by when you run this. I do think that this card is good. I struggle honestly right now to think of a deck that I want to put this in that I'm not going to play some other prophecy instead, right? Like almost every deck that currently exists would rather run Harpy than Silt Strider. In a strictly control archer deck, you know, maybe you run it there to navigate to reposition your lethal creatures. But I love what they've done with prophecy in this expansion. I don't think this card is particularly strong, but I like it a lot. Suran Pawnbroker is a 2 magic 2/3 with plot. Put a random 0 cost card in your hand. This card is really good. Imagine getting Dres Spy off this. You probably run this in the same deck that Dres Spy is already in, frankly. This card is pretty damn good in market decks, too. Um, just piling up the 0 cost cards in your hand can be real powerful. You can play it on turn 2 if you have to make some trades so you can survive long enough to do your degenerate combo type things. And I think this card's probably pretty good in a lot of Halalu strategies in general, and might be good outside of there because a lot of the 0 cost cards are pretty high impact for costing 0. They just don't see play because they take up a spot in your deck. Getting them for free, awesome. I think this card's real good. Ash Oppressor, 3 magic of 4/3, pretty good rate. And then summon if you have a creature with power 5 or more, shackle an enemy creature. First, we need to address this guy's human horn. It's very interesting. Look, he has going on there. Is this card good? It's hard to say. Do you ever want to shackle an opposing creature after you already have a 5 power creature in play with your 3-drop creature? If your deck is built entirely around beating your opponent's face in, then this sort of tempo play might be worth it. I think Ash Oppressor is powerful and will see play. I don't think it's an auto-include. It's a card that requires a little bit of finesse to play correctly. There are going to be times, of course, where it is correct to play it on turn 3 and just be down with it, and it does a good job at that, being a 4/3. In fact, it's those aggressive stats that make me even consider playing this card because the ability is super situational. I do think that it's probably pretty good, and I think it's going to see some play. And the art is just hilariously awesome. Blood Sacrament is a 3 magicka action that says deal 2 damage to your opponent and gain 2 life with Betray. This card is not good. Corner Club Gambler. It's another 4-3 for 4. I'm sorry, 4-3 for 3. Summon, discard a card. At start of your turn, draw 2 cards, and the Corner Club Gambler loses this ability. Is this card any good? Yeah, this card's really good. It filters cards for you, turns cards you don't need right now into 2 cards in the future. All it has to do is survive 1 turn, and if your opponent spends removal on it, you did just get 2 for 1, but you probably, to use this card effectively, you either need to use it when your opponent's not going to do that, and you know that because they've already used their removal, the board state is such that it's not likely to happen, or you use this to fish out removal for your more high value creatures that you'd rather play, in which case the card disadvantage is sometimes worth it. This card's pretty strong. It's not for everybody, and it's not for every deck. And I mean for everybody in the sense that this is sort of a kind of card you need to play with a certain level of finesse. Um, but it's a very powerful card. Guar Stable Master, this good boy, is a 3 magic, a 3/3 with summon, +1/+1, and guard if you have an animal. Do you want to play a green creature that is a 4/4 for 3 if with guard if you have an animal? Well, I think you do in the animal deck. I think you kind of have to intentionally play that deck in order to get value out of this. It's pretty good in Arena, where you combine it with the mud crabs that you're kind of forced into running. I don't think this card's going to have any constructed impact. Twin Lamps Console is a 2/4 for 3 that has plot, lethal, and guard. So if you play another card before it, it gets lethal and guard. Is that 2/4 lethal guard good enough to justify running this card? Yes, if it always triggered. The plot makes it a little bit iffy. The kind of deck where you're going to get most value out of this. So this card is a lot like Hive Defender in aggressive decks. You use this creature to protect your cheaper creatures. So I feel like this card lands on turn 4 a lot more often than it lands on turn 3. Because I don't know how many 0-cost cards you're possibly comboing with this to make it worth it. There's a short window in every game where this card is pretty good. If you hit this card afterwards or beforehand, it's not super useful. A 2/4 body for 3 on its own, if you have to play it, isn't bad and is likely to survive combat at least once if you drop it on turn 3. I think this card will probably see some play. I think that Halalu Archer is going to be a thing, or Plot Archer is going to be a thing. And this card will probably be part of that deck. Cliffstrider, 3/4 charge, can't attack your opponent. At the end of your turn, if there are no enemy creatures in this lane, move Cliffstrider. This card is not particularly good. It's really interesting. It's a green control card for 4 Magicka, which I like a lot, theoretically. But I think that whatever color you're pairing with green is going to have better control options at 4 Magicka than this card. Drain Blood, 4 Magicka action, betray, give a creature -2/-2. There are certain circumstances where this is going to be great, and the rest of the time it's not going to be very good at all. Nyxhound. Some of this art in Morrowind just cracks me up. This is a 4 Magicka 3/2 with Prophecy. With Summon, shackle each enemy creature with less power than Nyxhound. So this is you guessed it, a rally card that you run with a bunch of rally creatures, even though there are no rally cards in green. Because, if if Winter's Grasp was cheaper and came attached to a body, you'd play it, right? And in the right deck, that's exactly what this is going to do. Every other situation is not going to be great. Even on turn 4, shackling all 1 and 2 power creatures is not great. So, as a first room Prophecy hit, it's sort of interesting. I like that this has Prophecy, and there are going to be some situations where it just blows your opponent out. It's going to be hilarious. But I don't think this card's particularly good. I look forward to hitting my very first one on Prophecy, though, and having my opponent die of a heart attack. Burn Clan Nightstalker. I've touched on this in a couple other videos. It's a 5 Magicka 5/3 with guard. Summon, secretly choose an enemy creature at last gasp, destroy the chosen creature. You need to go into... I think, obviously, this card is very, 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 very strong. However, there are a lot of ways to not play this correctly. I'm still learning how to play this correctly, and there are some situations where it's just not going to be good. I think that getting a 1-for-1 with this card is almost guaranteed. The ideal situation involves you getting a 2 or even 3-for-1. It has great synergy with things like Altar of Despair and Cruel Firebloom. It's really, really strong. This card will see play. We're going to see a lot of this card over the next few months, and I look forward to playing with it. It's not a first craft because it's one of those cards that you should probably play with a few times before you, in arena, let's say, draft one and figure it out before you go ahead and commit to crafting it. But I like it a lot, and it's an exciting card. Blighted Werebat's a 5 magic, a 4/4 with drain. Says at the end of your turn, excuse me, if you have a creature with 5 more power, deal 2 damage to your opponent. I like the idea of a drain creature pinging my opponent and slowly gaining me life back. What I don't like is that the deck that's going to want to slowly gain life back with a creature that's just sitting around not swinging isn't the same kind of deck that wants their opponent's runes broken, thereby giving your opponent more resources with which to kill you. And the drain is sort of, you got to swing with it again to get that extra 4 life. It's a really good card when it comes to pivoting the game from you being the reactive player to you being the aggressive player by just putting your life total beyond a point from which your opponent can strike you down. But coming down on turn 5 at the earliest and requiring a 5 power creature on the board, I think that any of these 5 power creatures, abilities, any of them that necessitate coming down turn 5 or earlier, or give you the opportunity to, and not the payoff for coming down, later, the higher stat line you could get for cost more, I don't think that they're super interesting or worth it for the most part. I don't really like Blighted Werebat. I'm sure it's going to see some play, and that's because it's a 4/4 with Drain. But its ability is, I'm not a huge fan of it. I feel like it's going to randomly kill people, or get them killed anyway. Fleeting Apparition is a 5 magic action with Betray that says summon a random creature from your deck that costs 3 or less to a random lane, unsummon it at the end of your turn. I be honest with you, I have not figured this card out yet. I'm sure there are degenerate things to do with it. I have not pieced them together at the moment. I look forward to trying it out. I like that there are cards like this in this set that do, that you look at and say, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? I am not ready to experiment with this card. The Betray just makes it even more complex. Obviously, it has some synergy with other Betray cards, and that if you pull something cheap out of your deck, you can then betray it with another card. It's sort of like Altar of Despair, which I didn't, it's a card I play with a lot now, and I didn't play it all for the first like 2 or 3 weeks it was out because I didn't understand how to use it properly. Fleeting Apparition is an interesting and powerful and unique effect that I have not yet figured out. So I really can't give you I'm just being honest. I can't give you an adequate power level appraisal of this card. In a vacuum, useless, but obviously not meant to be played by itself. Tavani Oathman is a 5 Magicka 4/4. When you summon it, if you have a blue card in play, you draw a random action from your deck, and if you have a purple card in play, summon a Risen Dead in each lane. Risen Dead are 1/1 skeleton creatures with guard. This card is very, very, very powerful. Obviously, very niche as well. I think it's good enough. I think that both of its abilities are good enough to be played potentially in 2 color decks. In Scout, getting a guard in each lane is pretty good for 5 Magicka, and in Assassin, drawing a random action sounds awesome. Doing both sounds even better. This card's going to see play in Telvanni decks. It's strong enough that I think it could see play in other decks. There's not much to say about it. What it does is pretty straightforward, and it's the things it does are pretty unrelated to one another. It's just a pile of power in one card, and we're all going to face this guy down in the next few weeks. Naru Virian is the card we revealed at the Elder Scrolls Champion Series tournament a couple weeks ago. It's a 6 Magicka 6/6 Hail Satan, and has summon a 0/1 target with guard for your opponent in each lane. Friendly creatures have slay +1/+1 lethal. That means when they slay, they get +1/+1 lethal. They don't just always have lethal. This card's real good. Not much to say about it beyond that. It requires a little bit of finesse to use correctly. I think it's an inclusion in some kinds of rage decks. I think it's an inclusion in some just green-based mid-range decks as well. It's not a kind of card I would craft right away as a unique legendary. Its effect is interesting, although not game-breaking or super unique. It's just powerful enough and good enough at everything it does that you should probably put this in a lot of decks. But not all decks. Gentleman Jim Stacy has a similar situation for him. He's a 7 Magicka 5/4. Says summon your opponent chooses a card in their hand and gives it to you. It's great. This is even closer to discard than we have ever gotten before in this game. This card is super good in some matchups, unplayable in others, or irrelevant in others, I guess. And as at 7 Magicka for a 5/4, Not the kind of card you're going to be able to play like on curve to stem the bleeding when your opponent's beating your face in. But I like this card a lot. I'm running it in a couple decks. I think it's better in a 75 card deck than in a 50 card deck to decrease the likelihood of you drawing it in the early game. But I like this card. I think it's really interesting, and it opens up some cool opportunities to do neat stuff when your 3 color deck takes a card from the 4th color from your opponent, and you get to go even crazier. I am a little bit, I have to say, surprised that this ability showed up in green. Uh, it feels more like it should be a spell sword card, this ability. Historically, yellow steals things, and purple has interacted with opponents' hands before with the guy that mummifies the highest cost creature in their hand. This showing up in green is a little interesting and feels a little off to me. But if this is going to be part of green's color pie, then so be it. We've never seen this ability before, so. Finally, we have, not finally, but almost finally, we have Nixox, 7 magic, a 5/5, summon, gain 6 magic this turn. This card is very, 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 very strong. This card will see tons and tons and tons of play, and is going to be a huge Dagoth enabler, but also just good in a lot of decks that can run it. I mean, that's all there is to say about it. It's just really strong. Cliff Racer Onslaught, 9 Magica. Summon a 4/4 Cliff Racer with charge in each lane. Your opponent summons a 0/1 target with guard in each lane. I do not think this card is very good, although it's funny. And hopefully you get to hear the screeching of the Cliff Racer twice after you play this card. Good in Arena, as most 9-cost cards should be. Or at least powerful in Arena. Poor Ian Bits who revealed this card. Love Ian, but this card is... I don't know. Even if you have Naryu out, right, and you play this, and you suddenly have two 5/5s with lethal in each lane, like you still played 9 Magicka and didn't really impact the board, unless the creatures your opponent had in play that you wanted to kill were already guard creatures, in which case you're not advancing the board next turn because you still have two 0/1 targets on the board. That's it. That's it for this segment of the review.